Ok, iniciamos. I have started.
Okay, welcome everybody. Let's get started. I'm Louise Ball. I'm Director of Communications on Think Tanks, and I'll be facilitating the discussion today on the future of think tanks and the role of young think tankers in that future. Today's session is co-hosted by Southern Voice and OTT. Today we want to know, what are the big policy issues that young think tankers are worried about? What do you think the big issues think tanks will be tackling in the next 20 years are? What will think tanks look like in the future? And we want to know if your think tank is prepared for the future and what role young think tankers will play in preparing for and shaping that future. We have 5 young think tankers lined up to share their initial thoughts on these questions. And then we'll be opening it up and inviting you to join the conversation. We've chosen a fishbowl format, and if this is your first fishbowl, what that means is that at any given time we'll have 5 speakers with their cameras on. They are in our fishbowl with the rest of the audience on the other side watching and listening. After the first round, with our initial speakers, we'll invite some of you to come into the fishbowl. And some of our starting speakers will leave, and we'll do 2 rounds like that. So at all times we should have 5 speakers in the fishbowl, but we're getting to hear more and different perspectives. That's the idea. Let's see how it goes. But we really do want to hear from you in this session. So if you don't make it into the fishbowl, we will also be asking you and inviting you to take part in some polls along the way. And please do share any thoughts or questions you have in the chat at any time. We're going to use Mentimeter to do the interactive part. So I don't know if everyone has used Mentimeter before, but it's pretty straightforward. Let me share my screen. Right, if you have a smartphone or another device with internet nearby, just any phone with internet, I recommend using that, which means you can keep your computer free for Zoom, but you can also open a new browser on your computer. And then just go to www.menti.com, and at the top of this slide you'll see a code 34598176, and I'm going to put that into the chat as well. So on your smartphone or a new browser, www.menti.com, and then enter the code. And then when you get there, if you can either give us, there should be an icon, either a heart or a thumbs up, and if you can click on that, then we'll see that arrive here, and we'll know that you've made it. Okay, I can see some hearts and thumbs up appearing in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Just 3 of each. 4. If you have any problems accessing Menti, you can put that in the chat and we'll try and help you. But I think I like to do it on my phone just to have it there and then be able to see too. Okay, they're coming in now. Just give people a couple more seconds. I'll go into that. And then I've got 3 questions lined up just to test Mentimeter and find out a little bit more about who we have in the room. Okay, we've got 32 attendees, and I can see 22 people have managed to get there. Okay, let's go. Great. Okay, go now with the next question. Okay, so on your Mentimeter now, you should be being asked to tell us what country you're joining us from. Okay, good. We've got a good geographical spread there. Great. Okay. From early mornings in Latin America. I'm not giving anything away with my background, but I'm based in Mexico, so I'm with you. What do you do? What's your role? Are you in research, communications, fundraising? Are you a think tank funder? Tell us. A few research, we've got some communications, project management, policy advocacy. Great, so a lot of research. Okay, and our final question before we get going. How are you feeling today? Ready to go? Lots to say on this topic? Just want to listen in today, or just ready to see what happens? Okay, good mix. Oh, good balance. Great. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now and let's get going. Keep Mentimeter open because we will be coming back to that later to get more of your thoughts on questions. But for now, I'm going to introduce our 5 starting speakers. So we have Gabrielle Alves, who is a researcher at Plataforma CIPÓ, which is a Brazilian independent institute devoted to climate governance and peace issues. Regean Mugume, who works as a research analyst at Uganda's Economic Policy Research Centre. Dr. Diouf, a project coordinator at IPAR-Senegal, a think tank focusing on public policies in agricultural and rural sectors in West Africa. Maryam Shabbir Abassi, who works as a project associate on climate change and gender, as well as being a digital media coordinator for the Sustainable Development Policy Institute in Pakistan. And Bakang Ntshingane, program officer at Southern Voice, supporting the research and policy analysis programs there. So welcome. And I can see Jose Florito there, who's going to be joining us in the next round. So for this round 1, let's get going with the first question. In 20 years' time, what will the big policy issues that think tanks will need to be tackling? I'm going to invite each of our speakers to go for 1 minute. I'm going to go in clockwise order based on my screen. So Gabrielle, can I ask you to start us off?
Sure. Thank you, Louise. Nice to virtually meet you all. In my opinion, think tanks won't be able to ignore policy issues related to the impact of climate change in vulnerable groups, and in Brazil, especially traditional, indigenous, and Black communities. And I guess think tanks won't be able to close their eyes to racial issues and its deep intersection with the environment. So we've been keeping up with the discussions at COP26. Fighting environmental and climate racism are not only the future, but the present urgent policy discussions. And another important intersection is between race and technology. At CIPÓ, we are part of the Stop Killer Robots campaign, and we have been discussing algorithmic racism as well.
Thank you so much. Awa?
Yeah, thank you, Louise. Nice to meet you all. So as a development economist working on the African context, I think that in 20 years' time, an important issue will remain sustainable growth of Africa. How can African countries have an inclusive growth by considering the environmental factor, how to fight against economic and social poverty while maintaining our environmental and cultural wealth, how to feed our growing population in a responsible manner. In fact, the impact of humans on the environment is now undeniable, and in the future, this factor could be better integrated into the decision-making process. Besides that, sustainable development will request expensive investment projects, which makes funding an important issue for think tanks. For example, using new technologies and mobile banking could broaden the tax base and make our tax system more efficient. So we'll have to integrate new challenges, opportunities, and tools to the sustainable development of African countries. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And just I had a reminder from our tech team that we have interpretation in Spanish and French here. So if we can all try and speak clearly, I forgot as well, that would be really helpful. Thank you so much, Awa. Maryam.
Yes, thank you. I think most of the panelists has covered already, but I'll again emphasize that in the next 20 years, think tanks would be focusing on AIs. It would be focusing on intolerance, peace, climate change, species conservation, and water scarcity issue. That is what I see happening in Pakistan as well in the next 20 years, where think tanks will be very active.
Great, thank you. Regean.
Thank you so much. Maybe in addition to what the previous speakers have said, the next 20 years, we're looking at the global population, of course, going up, and particularly for the continents of Africa and Asia, given their current growth rates are very high compared to other continents. And so issues to do with how these continents can be able to harness their demographic dividend, but also issues to do with migration and urbanization are very key. And of course, given the upsurge in population growth, we are going to look at issues of food security, issues to do with human capital development. Given that there is that upsurge in population, we're going to look at think tanks really looking at how best governments can be able to invest in their population in terms of healthcare, education, and the like. So in the next 20 years, we're going to look, think tanks are going to look at issues around that. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Regean. And Bakang.
All right, yeah, thank you so much, Louise. And it's a pleasure to be here with all the other young think tankers. I think for me, the aftershocks of the 3 C's, which is climate, conflict, and COVID-19, will redefine the work of think tanks in the next 2 decades. Migration will no doubt be one of the biggest challenges of our time, compounded by the decline of state capacity, the deterioration of other key institutions in people's lives. And currently countries are already buckling under immense pressure and are failing to provide the type of security, the types of skills and job opportunities that mostly young people need. So I think this will trigger like a mass movement within the global south and outside of it. And as a result, governments and multinational corporations will descend into what the author Parag Khanna called a war for young talent, and I see it manifesting in so many ways and in so many issues. And I think the implications for this will be multifaceted, and I would argue that think tanks would be at the forefront of answering some of these emerging questions, where young people are going to other countries to find better livelihoods. I think think tanks will be at the forefront of investigating why they're leaving, and how countries can adapt their education systems to cater for this emerging mass migration. So over and above that, I think the policy issues and debates from think tanks will be contextually relevant, and that's a good thing to look forward to. And as other speakers already said, I think there'll also be a lot of focus on the intersectionalities of other issues such as human rights, inequality within and amongst countries, and technology, and whether or not the current institutions that we have are fit for purpose. So yeah.
Wonderful, thanks so much. A lot to think about: rights, human rights, indigenous rights, climate change, AI, population growth, migration and urbanization. And I like the 3 C's: climate, conflict, and COVID. There's a lot of questions for governments to answer, and think tanks will be playing a leading role in helping answer those. So with this in mind, given these challenges of the future, and today, what will think tanks look like in the future? Before I turn to our speakers again for their initial thoughts, Southern Voice ran a survey with young think tankers on this question, and I'll just share with you a few of the answers that they gave. In 20 years, think tanks will be critical to counter the phenomenon of societal polarization and distrust of established institutions. Think tanks will need to communicate to lay people and expand their teams for multidisciplinary approaches in order to have influence. We'll have more opportunity to interact, network, and share ideas and learn from one another around the world. And then someone else took that even further and said that think tanks will surpass geographical boundaries. They won't have formal office space or structures or staff. They will have freelance collaborators sharing ideas on digital platforms. Someone else thought that research is going to have to get a lot faster, turning around answers within a couple of months. 2 to 3 years of research will be futile. And then my favorite answer, that think tanks in 20 years will be conquering the world. So those were some of the insights from a recent survey. Now I'm going to go back to our starting speakers. Gabrielle, can I come back to you?
Sure. Well, I like to imagine future think tanks as a multicultural, open environment with more field research, more dialogue with affected communities, and even more dialogue with universities from different parts of the world. I think the pandemic taught us we are deeply connected, but we are also deeply dependent on physical face-to-face bonds. So it's important to maintain networks on a local and on an international level. I also imagine think tanks with a diverse staff, including more Black and Indigenous people from different backgrounds. And I guess we have already realized that social media is a point of no return. So I also like to imagine think tanks being increasingly able to translate their researchers into more infographics and a more accessible language to reach a broader audience.
Thank you. Awa?
Yeah, well, as Gabrielle just said, I totally agree with her. We are moving to a world where digital tools will enable all actors to express themselves, make their needs understood, and propose solutions. So think tank will have to follow this movement and adapt their work to the needs and expectations of stakeholders, especially the beneficiaries of public decisions. So with a world of digital tools and social media, think tank will move away from targeting only decision makers and integrate all other stakeholders in their strategy of influence. And by the way, guarantee a more inclusive governance. Secondly, think tanks could collaborate and work from decision makers and influencers other than governments. Many actors are not in the public sector and can also have an influence on society. For example, young people are sensitive to influencers in social networks. This can be a good way of communicating the results of think tanking to create a greater impact. Finally, evolving with innovating way of doing research will allow more relevance to policy recommendation. Science, data, and numbers are increasingly ruling the world and will soon be the best, if not the only way to gain the confidence of economic actors and decision makers. So think tankers could adapt their work to how data and research are generated, For example, big data, artificial intelligence, etc. So in the future, think tanks could be more connected and take advantage of what new technologies offer. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Maryam.
Hi, thanks. So I would relate mostly with the issues I just focus in the first segment. I see that there will be a lot of shifting from fossil fuel to clean energy. So I see that there will be more of dialogues between private sector and those involved in those fossil fuel sector with the government, and that's where I see the relevance of civil society and think tanks. They should fit in there. And then increase a political commitment. I think that would be very important, and that I imagine, because the world cannot wait anymore, and it's not a debate about 1.5 degree anymore. It has now reached 1.8 degree, and few reports even say if climate actions, those pledges are not translated into action, it's going to be 2.8 according to one of the report. So I see more commitment from political leaders, and when I say this, it's because developed and rich nations would also be facing effects of climate change, and they are already doing it, like forest fires in United States of America, heat waves there, and then heat waves and glacier melting in Canada. And you see developing countries are always at the forefront when it comes to impacts of climate change. And then also, flooding in Belgium and Germany, these are all wake-up calls for those nations as well to just wake up. And I see political commitments in next, it should be earlier, ideally, but I see that in next 20 years, and where role of think tank would be important to take them on board as well, to start discussion with them and to tell them reality and latest reports, because they are not usually very technical people over there. Think tanks and civil society need to tell them in very short and brief form, because they don't have time to read a lot of long reports. And then also international dialogues for capacity building and retraining of the workers. As I mentioned that, we also need to involve fossil fuel sectors and their employees, because when we are shifting away from fossil fuels, they have to be taken on board and they have to be retrained and reskilled so that they can adapt to new markets and they are not left behind. And also, I see, right now I see youth on the roads when it comes to pushing actions for climate change. By next 20 years, I see and I imagine youth involved in policymakers, especially women. Especially in developing countries, because they are not given a chance as such. I would be very honest and direct in this regard, because that's the truth, unfortunately. And I also imagine that in next 20 years, women will be equally paid when we compare with men, because right now we are far behind with that.
Thank you so much. Regean.
Thank you so much. In the next 20 years, I see think tanks forging more partnerships with the private sector. And this is something that has been lacking in the recent past. And I think this is going to really help think tanks in terms of sustainability, because we've been facing a challenge of sustainability as think tanks. But I'm looking at in the next 20 years, think tanks are going to enter into strategic partnerships with the private sector. And also just in relation to what the past speakers have indicated, the role of think tanks is going to go beyond the confined offices, and we're going to have more engagements of think tanks with the different stakeholders and more engagements with the public to really understand their problems at the ground. So in the next 20 years, we're going to look at think tanks going out there in the public and engaging the different stakeholders, civil society organizations, the private sector, and the government, but also the local people, to be able to forge solutions that can be able to address the common person. Also, in terms of evidence-based research, in the next 20 years, think tanks are going to be more timely. They're going to be really coming up with real-time evidence, because for example, the case of COVID, where think tanks have have come up with ways of collecting data virtually. And for example, the case of big data analytics. So we're going to look at think tanks really being so timely in evidence-based research and to inform policy by government. And also, just as Maryam has indicated, we're going to look at think tanks. We look at think tanks in next 20 years being more gender sensitive, and particularly the role of women in think tanks becoming so prominent, because we are looking at inclusive and sustainable development. And given the role of women in the economy and in the different sectors, we're going to look at more think tanks recruiting women to be able to address the issues of women, because issues of women can be actually most laid out by women themselves. And yeah, of course, in terms of digitalization, we are in the world of the fourth industrial revolution. So we're going to look at think tanks really using the innovations and the technologies to be able to conduct their research and to bring it out in real time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bakang?
All right. So I think that think tanks of the future will look like our ancestors' wildest dreams. There's a very common saying where people keep on saying that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, and I think think tanks will look exactly like that. But to comment, to add a bit on the gender question, I think gender for think tanks will be beyond just a token thing or a symbolic gesture. Because it won't be because of that, but it will be because it's the right thing to do, not because of funding commitments and everything like that. Secondly, I think think tanks will be at the forefront of new thinking in terms of providing analysis and evidence that is ideologically diverse. And this will enable them to challenge conventional wisdom. For example, the rethinking economics movement of students and economics practitioners is currently challenging the predominance of old economics dogma and the way that economics is being taught around the world. And I think think tanks will move in that direction as well. Thirdly, I think that think tanks will level the current organizational power imbalances flat on the ground. The new wave of interest that multilateral institutions are showing in the think tanks movement will help shift these power dynamics that think tanks have, especially with donors. Our increasing presence in the global stage particularly will shape a new way of thinking that we have our own power to set the research agenda and prioritize things that we want to prioritize. And I think that as a result, our relationships with external actors will be very much different than they are now. And external actors such as multilateral institutions will certainly want to hear what think tanks have to say. Over the last couple of years, I think that think tanks have done a great job to sort of put one foot into the door of international organizations and have an opportunity to influence dialogue and debate. But I think that, as a result of all these dynamics that we've seen, think tanks of the future will have some kind of reciprocal relationship where our existence with multilateral and intergovernmental organizations is mutually reinforcing, right? We will realize that we do need each other, not for survival, but to push like a more constructive agenda that goes a long way. And I hope that we can continue to pass on the baton and onto the next generation of young think tankers. But also structurally, I would concur with my panelists that the idea of a think tank will be more fluid, and that will be influenced by the current wave of digital of the digital world, right? Where you can work from anywhere in the world, and diversity will not only manifest itself across gender, race, nationalities, but across disciplines as well, to form sort of a hybrid model of research and policy influencing that we've never seen before. And not just for one sector. I think think tanks in the future will be more intersectional, right? Exploring the relationship between different issues of human rights, climate change, and so on and so forth, and so forth. So that's kind of a snapshot of my vision of how think tanks will look like in the future. And I hope that I get to have an opportunity to influence that. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. So lots to dig into there. More diversity within think tanks, more women, more gender sensitivity. The role of technology is going to change think tanks and how they work, more fluid, more accessible format, social media, real-time evidence, more engagement with more diverse actors, private sector, the public, local communities, and challenging thinking, pushing agendas forward. And Maryam gave us a nice example there on the role of youth in pushing the climate change agenda forward. I'm going to invite our panelists, our speakers, to just come back in if they would like to respond to anything that one of their fellow speakers have said, or would like to add a final thought in this round before we invite others into the conversation. If you'd like to jump in there, you can just turn your microphone on. And if not, we'll move straight on to the next round. Last chance. Okay, great.
Yeah,
oh,
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Please do.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment on what Gabrielle said about the intersection of race and the environment. And I was reminded of the whole decoloniality conversation that's been going on in international development circles. And I think that think tanks will perhaps play a very critical role in maturing the decolonization conversation, because right now it's a bit messed up, and there really isn't like a clear-cut conversation about how decolonization in the aid industry, in the education industry, should happen, and all of those things. And I hope and I trust that think tanks will sort of be the guardian for these conversations and influence them in a much more constructive way. And I also think that the issue of inclusive growth and in like encouraging developing countries to have inclusive growth that is environmentally conscious also has a long way to go. With the ongoing COP26 summit, there's also like a clash of interests where we have developed countries offering money to developing countries to transition from coal to using renewable energy. But at the same time, there's like a lapse in commitments between the two countries. So I see think tanks also occupying that space to sort of bring the two worlds together and to bring all the conversations happening together to sort of build a path forward. So that's my short thinking.
Nice vision. Anybody else want to say a final word?
Yes, if I may.
Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on whatever was said on climate-induced migration. And I know I have been working on that from past for some times now. And it is really, it's not only an environmental problem and human issue, but also it's an economic issue, because once climate-induced migrants start moving within cities of a particular state or across the border, you know, it will have a burden on economy and natural resources wherever they are moving. So it's going to create, you know, multiple impacts in multiple directions. So it is something, you know, which is it's not just due to fast onset events, but it's also due to slow onset events as well, which is often not addressed during negotiations happening at COP26. And loss and damage, which was happening right before this session, which I was viewing online, because this year I couldn't attend COP due to my one-year-old son. I have to stay here due to very cold weather over there in Glasgow. So I think it's very, very important that developed world and rich nations pay attention towards that, because it's not only issue of developing country and the developed world, but also their issue, because once we will start moving, I meant climate-induced migrants start moving across border, it will be an issue for them as well.
Thank you. Gabrielle, did you want to come in?
Well, just addressing something that Maryam said before about the gender agenda, I think I completely agree with her, because when we talk about gender issues, like there are already several researchers that address that women are more impacted by climate change. So I think researchers will be primarily focused on how gender is affected by that. And what Bakang said before about the decolonization process, I think that this agenda is kind of delayed because the staffs are not as diverse as they could be, because this is an agenda that should have been discussed like a long time ago. And now that think tanks are trying to be more open and more diverse, that these new agendas are coming in. So I think that our role as young think tankers is also to bring these new agendas and to keep updating and like fighting for new paths to thematics in general.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, now we want to open this up a little bit and hear from some of our audience on the other side of our fishbowl. So I'm going to share my screen again. So if you can go back to your Mentimeter, open that up again. Hopefully you've still got it open. If not, you can log back in with that code at the top of the screen, 34598176. And we want to ask everybody listening and watching, and our speakers as well, if they would like to add anything else. How will think tanks have to adapt as organisations to address the policy challenges of the future? We've had some initial ideas from our starting speakers, and let's see what other people think. Engagement is going to be key. Funding is an important topic we can dig into. I'll just give people another 30 seconds to think and write. Well, we're definitely seeing some clear themes come out here around technology and digitalization, engagement being a big one, diversity, both in terms of teams and also in terms of interdisciplinary research, engagement, communication, relationships, critical thinking. Great. I'm going to stop sharing. And now's the time where we change our speakers. We bring in some more perspectives. So we have a couple of people already waiting. We have Jose and also Kimuthu, I think, is also here waiting. If you would like to come and join us, you can raise your hand. I can see one hand raised for Doc. So if our Southern Voice colleagues can help bring Put Doc into our fishbowl, that would be great. And then I'm going to ask three of our starting speakers to temporarily turn their cameras off. So Maryam, Regean, and lost people. And oh, they gone already? Okay, great. So we're 5 again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So let's come in on this question of that I can see in the chat around the physical think tank. Post-pandemic, especially, I think I can see it going one of two ways, that we go fully remote. We did the offices, maybe the future generation of think tank leaders won't see the need for the office, or maybe we're going to go and embed ourselves, feel the need to embed ourselves deeper into governments or communities. Gabrielle, you mentioned this a little bit as well. After the pandemic, we've realized what we can do with technology, but we've also realized the importance of face-to-face communication. So I don't know if anyone would like to come in and talk about how they see the physical think tank in the future and how think tanks might need to adapt to address the challenges. Oh, just a note there that if you would like to join the fishbowl and you raised your hand, we'll be sending you an invitation to come and join the panel. So Doc, I think that you should have an invitation, you accept it, and then you'll come into the fishbowl. You'll get an invitation if you're coming into the fishbowl. Gabrielle, would you like to say a little bit more about about this digital face-to-face?
Yeah, well, I think, can you listen to me? I think my
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I think what I said before is because like right now at CIPÓ, we are fully like on a digital format. So like during the pandemic, I really missed the face-to-face contact. And I think that future think tanks can address this issue, like going on a hybrid mode somehow, like because the digital format is also really good because we can like, of course, save some money due the infrastructure that we use like our home for it. But I think that, I don't know, maybe being embedded with universities and bringing like the affected communities, as I said before, so we could make like our researchers go to the field more often, because I think sometimes we lose like the sense of what is really going on outside being on a fully digital mode. And there are like other issues like the empathy, like the connection that we feel with like human beings in general. I think the pandemic taught me this like as a real lesson, that I really need to interact sometimes with people, not only being isolated all the time as we stayed at home like during this whole COVID situation.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. Would anyone else like to come in on that question of how was the pandemic in your think tank? What did you learn from that? And how do you think it's going to shape the future of think tanks? Any of our new speakers want to come in on that? Gabrielle, Kimutu?
Yeah, I would like to speak on it. So we have been working from home on and off, starting from 2020. So I actually graduated from university this year, so I'm quite new to work, but I used to intern at the same place that I'm currently working in. So we've been working, it's not necessarily very convenient because like we have connection issues all the time, and we have certain power generation issues and power crisis also. So it's not very convenient for us to work from home all the time. But like she said, like it's a new experience also. Like sometimes I miss going to work, but sometimes I just like to just chill and work from home, because even at a roster basis, it's fine, rather than going to work every single day and commuting to work on like facing all the traffic as well. So it's quite convenient for me to work from home. And I think it's also in a way sustainable for us, because in Sri Lanka, like we don't have a lot of hybrid or electric vehicles. Like we use a lot of fossil fuel vehicles. So and during the pandemic also, we don't use public transport. We use private vehicles. So when we're using our own transport, we tend to like burn a lot of fossil fuels, and it's not very sustainable. So I feel like working from home and having this kind of digital arrangement is kind of convenient, and in a planet way it's good, but in a people's perspective, sustainable development also focuses on the well-being of people, right? So we shouldn't really forget the people part. So I think in a people perspective, I'm not really sure whether that's the best idea to lose connection and interaction with people.
Yeah, really important point. Think tanks are people. I'm talking to this point about remote working, your connection was going a little bit, but I think we got most of that. So it's a good good example of the challenges of working remotely. Gabrielle, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Sorry for my voice, I have a little cold, so sorry for that. Yeah, we have a very similar experience, we have been working from home since March 2020. I remember the day, the 16th of March. And it has been a real challenge, we have had teammates that have left the team in that time. We haven't have a proper goodbye. We have teammates that have come and gone without ever meeting them in person. It's also a challenge with, our counterparts, with, our financiers, the organizations that we work with, also the communities that we work with. Most of our activities, or practically all of them, have been online, and that we used to have a lot of events that were in person, and that provided a lot of feedback, a lot of comments to our work that made us, that invited us to do better work, and that has been something that we have lost somewhat. Also, in the terms of the work, we have a lot of written products, and it's harder to get feedback from our supervisors or the members that we work with. We have to be more selective with what we send. It's not like we can walk over to their desk and show them what we're working on and get instant comments. We have to plan out the day in terms of what we're going to send. In general, there is a lot less feedback. Of course, there are benefits as well. We have reduced our transportation costs, our office costs. We have a little bit of more control over our hours, our activities during the day. But I think in the future, we would like to have a mixture of both modes. There are benefits and disadvantages to both methods of working, and I think that we need to find the right balance, and allow everyone to develop the best working method that suits their lifestyle and their skills.
Great, thank you so much. It's about balance, maybe a hybrid model. I can see in the chat as well that Maryam's also made the same point that in being able to work from home and also being able to do caring responsibilities. So it also speaks to our point around more inclusivity and diversity within think tanks. Jose, you've got your hand up, and I know you also wanted to talk about think tank management as well. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Louise. Well, I think digitization is great. It's actually what allows us to meet today, but it also brings challenges. One of them is this we are talking about hybrid ways of work or remote work, but I like to focus on two additional ones. First, the exponential rate at which digital technologies change implies that young think tanks will have to put more effort into continuous learning to stay relevant. New technologies will be critical to sharper methodological approaches based on for example, on exploitation of big data and on the collaboration with artificial intelligence. So fixed academic backgrounds will be less relevant than adaptability and the continuous reskilling of researchers to avoid the risk of becoming obsolete. And the second challenge is related not so much to skills, but to digital infrastructure. That is something that came up in the chat as well. there's already a large digital infrastructure gap between think tanks in the North and in the Global South. So the effective use of methods based on the Internet of Things or artificial intelligence demands greater computing processing capacities and connectivity, which in turn demand investing in a context in which many think tanks from the South find funding a challenge in itself, and even work remotely may be a challenge related to digital infrastructure. So I believe that these thoughts on digitization can be related to these two additional discussions. Where will think tanks be located given this hybrid dynamic we entered since the pandemic? And what other skills besides digital ones will be the most prized among young researchers in the not so distant future?
Great, thank you. And it's good that you mentioned skills there. One of the things I want to talk about next actually is around engagement, which has come up a lot. We've heard, I can see in the chat, someone said, get rid of PDFs. I agree. And people have talked about accessible formats, technology aiding and changing the way we engage with different communities. So that's the next topic I'd like to talk about. If there are any communicators as well in the audience who would like to jump in on the conversation, let us know. But I can see that we've got a new speaker, Guillaume, who's just joined us. So either on what we've just been talking about or on the new topic of engagement, well, please do join us.
Thank you, Louise, and hi everyone. I would just like to follow up on José's comment, because I think from the South, think tanks from the South, like us here in Brazil, we have to start from the bottom, right? And sometimes that means that we have to explain to people what think tanks really are. And that's very difficult because a lot of people here in Brazil, they have no idea of what think tanks really are and what they do. So we really have to build from ground zero, right? And if there was one aspect, one positive aspect of this pandemic was that we could reach further, right? We could reach further audiences nationally and internationally. And that helped us, especially at ISAPI, where I work, to bring awareness on the importance of think tanks and the work that we conduct. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Would anyone like to come in on the topic of engagement, communications? Do today's think tanks have the right skills, the right people? What do we need to be thinking about?
Can I pitch in?
Please do.
So traditionally, I think in Sri Lanka, people believe that researchers should ideally have academic merit, right? So people with good brains or like intelligent people would get research. But I believe right now, like what helped me as a researcher was sometimes my networking skills, my communication skills, or like ability to spontaneously think. Because like, for example, in Sri Lanka, currently our government has banned.
Sorry, Kimuthu, your connection was breaking up, so we couldn't hear you there. Maryam's got her hand up. Hang on. Kimuthu, give it a go again.
Yeah, you didn't hear anything that I said?
It just broke up for a little bit. We could hear most of it. If you could just give us a summary in...
Okay, what I think is like community engagement is also important because mostly researchers don't relate to the ground level, the targeted group of our policy research. Because in Sri Lanka, there is an outright ban on chemical fertilizers right now imposed by the government. And it's ruining everything for like the harvest is very low, and
I'm afraid that the connection is breaking up.
And the food prices. Okay.
Sorry, but I think the connection, I think we got the main point, which is around community engagement, ground up working. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. Maryam.
Yes, thank you. I'll be just very quick to speak on the communication a little bit because I'm both into research and communications. And I think I always hear as soon as I joined SDPI that, research communicated is research not really done. So whatever you're producing, it will stay on your websites. If you're not communicating in the form of different products, be it on in the form of banner or an infographic or small video or a small documentary, it is very important to translate it into communication and into non-technical terms for your relevant stakeholders. If you are engaging, let's suppose you're doing a research where you want to involve policymakers and you expect them to read your full-fledged reports, which is very technical. Normally they're very non-technical people. So you have to, what we do at SDPI practice as SDPI is that we translate that technical research into two-pager non-technical research and send them for policy recommendations, not in the form of hard form, but also for face-to-face discussion as well, so that they can understand the real issue and evidence-based research we have produced and what kind of policy change, they should be doing. So it's very important a part of engagement to develop a proper strategy, be it digital communication or be it for your relevant stakeholder. And it's very important to get in touch with your communities as well in your local language, because that's very important for them and very easy for them to digest your information and what you require from them. That's all I wanted to say.
Great, thank you so much. I can see in the chat that we've also decided to ditch the PowerPoint as well. I think so no more PDFs, no more PowerPoints. And I can also see someone's written that most think tanks put little attention to communications and really have real experts working on it. That needs to change. And no use in having great research if it's not communicated clearly to the right audience. And we've heard here that means accessibility in terms of formats, etc., but also, as you just said, Maryam, about accessibility in terms of language, and sometimes that's about going into communities face to face as well, not just all digital. Okay, great. I'm going to take a pause and do another poll. So bear with me if you could return to your Mentimeter. Where is it? Here it is. So the next question for you is your think tank prepared for the future? And then I'm going to be inviting you to speak about the role of young think tankers in helping to shape that future within think tanks. Okay. Cautiously optimistic, it seems. Okay, so we're hovering just over the 50% there at Bring It On, but still some work to do. Stop sharing. So this is our final round before we go to closing comments from our initial speakers. So if anybody else would like to join the conversation, you can raise your hand and we'll try to bring you in. While we're waiting for others to come in, what do our current speakers think about this question of the role of young people in think tanks? Are young people being valued in their think tanks? Are their ideas being heard? What role will they play in shaping this future of think tanks? Who would like to come in? Yeah.
Thank you, Louise. I think one of the things that we pride ourselves at is API, which is the South American Institute for Politics and Strategy, is to give room precisely to young experts in order to break that resistance that to be an expert means to be a senior researcher automatically, right? We can have great experts who are of young age, and we try to value that at ISAPI. So we usually joke around that we have experts who don't have gray hair, right? So that's very important for us, and we value that because especially in Brazil, there is a lot of prejudice when it comes to expertise and the background, the experience, and the age of the researcher.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. And Regean, I can't see you, but I think I can see your hand up.
Thank you so much. My connection is not the best. That is why I can't use my video. But maybe to respond to this question, how young think tankers can help in shaping the future. One is we have to be flexible as think tankers, flexible to learn much more than just the research that we do, and look at, for example, we have to sharpen our communication skills, how we are able to communicate our findings in a very convincing way to influence policy, and of course also trying to go digital, of course, because now in the new world we need to learn how to use social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn and the likes, to be able not to just produce research papers, but also to see how we can be able to take it out in a simple way that communicates to the public and also to other stakeholders. And also young think tankers need to leverage the support of peer review and how to be better researchers, because being a senior researcher, being outside there, and you are trying to make a point, you have to be the best at your thing. So we need to really be able to produce quality work, position ourselves, because research is quite an engaging career. So we need to be able to invest more time and in research, but also to depend on senior researchers and be able to learn as much as we can so that we can be good at whatever we are doing. And maybe thirdly is also to interest ourselves in topical issues that really are going to affect the globe, issues to do with climate change, issues to do with digital financial inclusion, food security, which are solutions to the global challenges that we are facing today. So interesting ourselves in topical issues is very important. And lastly, the young think tankers need to be involved at all stages of the policy processes, not just generating evidence, but going ahead to be able to communicate it, being involved in advocacy, in policy advocacy and argumentation, to ensure that we are heard and we influence policy. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you so much, Regean. Would anyone else like to come in?
Yes, if I may say a few things. Well, I should say that our organization, Espacio Público, we are based in Chile. And as you may know, in Chile currently, we are writing a new constitution. There is a constituent assembly that is working. And this constituent assembly has very much put forward a lot of topics that young researchers are making a lot of work on, and that they are very much involved in the process. I think on topics like gender, urbanism, transportation, children's and adolescents' rights, and environment, of course, is a big one. And in organization, we are following this process with much attention and work. And I think we are seeing that young researchers really do have a lot to say about these topics, and they are making a real impact, and are making proposals and putting forward themes that are really at the vanguard of research in these areas. I think it's a very interesting combination of what can be achieved when we we have a process that is very much that opens the door for these things to be put forward, and we have such quality research and topics being given. And I think that think tanks can be a really good space for these researchers. We work with a lot of them who have worked in universities sorry, and academia, and they can sorry I said I have a cold, and they can work with us. We have a real policy advocacy mandate, and we can go to work together to create a real impact.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself there. Thank you so much. Yeah, so having young think tankers and think tank leaders can help us, means that think tanks are more able to respond to those needs and interests of young people. And Maryam, you mentioned this right at the beginning about young people really pushing forward the climate change agenda. In your work, do you think that think tanks are really engaging at the moment with those youth movements? Do you see more opportunity for engagement? What might that look like?
Yes, actually, right now, I would say pre-COVID time, because that's when climate strikes were happening on the streets. But due to COVID-19, it has changed the format. Now it's more of online. But still, people are coming out on streets. But it is there is another challenge when I say that more people are on the street for climate actions and more young people are on the streets. I see that think tankers have started at some point activism when it comes to climate change. Most of the think tanks and even SDPI, it was very much into activism for climate action. But gradually it has changed its kind of course, I would say, or strategy to really work on. And now, it's more of engagement with the relevant stakeholders if we want to bring really a change. But to put a pressure on relevant stakeholders, it's very important to be on the streets. And I see that, more young people. I saw in 2018, I was one of the climate march organizers in Islamabad. In my individual capacity, not on institutional capacity, because the SDPI was not really involved in organizing that. It was purely of citizens' call. And I, as a citizen, participated and organized that as well among the organizing committee. So in future, I think the way youth is putting pressure on relevant stakeholders for climate action, if given the role in leadership, they can really make this happen. If they can put a lot of pressure and they can, create a lot of stress for policymakers and political leaders, if they are given the space, and especially women, no offense to men, but if you see women leaders are, I would say more responsible, more sensitive. Not every man is insensitive or irresponsible. That's not what I'm saying. But if you see around the globe, women leaders are, can make things happen. They just don't talk. They really care about planet and climate. And if you look at these small and medium enterprises as well related to environment and climate change, they are also making really a shift into climate action. And of course, young men are also making difference there. There are a lot of startups based in Islamabad even as well for waste management system. They are just building on that. So given the opportunity to youth in decision making and policy making process, I think they can really make a huge difference in comparison to our elders.
Right. Thank you so much. So again, coming back to diversity of perspectives and voice within our think tanks of the future. Okay, we're nearing the end of our session, so I want to return to our initial 5 speakers. So thank you so much to those of you who've jumped over the fishbowl and come join us in the conversation. But I'm going to return to our initial 5 speakers for a final minute of reflections based on what you've heard in the conversation. Have you changed your mind about anything that you started off with your vision for the future of think tanks, or anything else you would like to reflect upon in terms of the role of young think tankers in helping to deliver the future of think tanks? So I'll come to Awa. Can I come to you first?
Yeah, of course. So thanks. I think that the world is changing, making progress and moving forward, and think tanking must move forward with the world. Young think tankers could bring this touch of innovation, connection, and novelty to think tanking. Indeed, including young people will allow think tanks to prepare and make changes necessary to take charge of future challenges of think tanking. So especially regarding support of new technologies and communication tools. So in the African context, people are young. By 2050, 35% of young people in the world will be African. So including young people as think tankers and stakeholders of the think tanking is more necessary than ever. So who could better understand, study, integrate young people in the decision-making process, if not the young people themselves? Young people also want to make things happen. Let's just give them a chance. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Regean, we can't see you, but I think you're there. 1 minute final reflection.
My final reflection on the role of young people in think tanks. Well, in the future, I see the role of think tanks becoming more prominent, given the global challenges that have been mentioned in our discussion, the issues of climate change, issues of food security, and of course, the emerging pandemics like the COVID pandemic that we're in. And I see that young people the young think tankers need to learn more skills, not just research, but also communication skills, digital skills, to be able to foster sustainable development in future, and to be able to remain relevant and to make these think tanks relevant. And maybe secondly also is to really in terms of the policy processes, the young people need to be involved at all levels of the policy processes, not just policy research, but following up in terms of advocacy to ensure that their voices are heard. I think for now, that is what I can say. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you so much. Gabrielle?
Well, my final thoughts is that young people can shape future think tanks using like their creativity and not being afraid to get out of their comfort zones. Like a sustainable and just world depends on creative and fearless solutions. So being able to like challenge a system that was built to lower and sometimes extinguish our voices is not like an easy task. So change is never easy, but I think our generation has the resources and broader information and connectivity to not only reach traditional actors and spaces, but forge our own actors and our own spaces. Like Tishai Surui and Amanda Costa are like Brazilian examples of that. They are participating at the COP26 right now, and they are young activists and researchers who have their voice heard. And someone brought here on the chat another important aspect that I think I should address as well, that we should really improve our digital skills, and maybe learning to program and other qualitative and quantitative data analysis research methods is something important, and promoting more open data. And in Brazil, it is important to address, as someone else mentioned before, the digital exclusion, because when we think about like new think tanks, new models of think tanks, we have to think that not everyone has the access of internet and infrastructure that I have or that we have. Great. And that's, thank you.
Thank you so much. Maryam, did you want to add anything? I know I picked on you earlier. And would you like to add any final reflections? No? Okay. We heard from you just a minute ago. Bakang, would you like to share your final reflections?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm glad that well, the majority of us agree on what we think the direction that think tanks should take is. Well, for me, I think the first challenge is to overcome the ivory tower syndrome that many critical thinkers are always accused of in academic and research circles. I think we have a challenge to make our work more accessible and more engaging. And particularly us as think tankers, we have a unique opportunity here to sort of break down the existing barriers to our own work. And secondly, the issue of partnerships. I think we have like a huge opportunity here to build partnerships that will move us into the future. And I was here thinking that we're clearly not meant to do this alone, because you'll find that think tanks in most instances are communities of like-minded individuals. And many of us in developing countries face similar, if not, the same challenges of development, of education, of democracy, of health systems that are not working for us, and institutions that are not inclusive. So I think there's a question here of how can we think more broadly about the intersections of our challenges and come up with well-targeted solutions that are responsive. And also, promoting peer-to-peer knowledge exchanges, especially amongst think tanks. I think that's one thing that we've been very passionate about it at Southern Voice. And lastly, I would say that, someone said a few minutes ago about, having to explain constantly what a think tank is. So I think the onus is really on us as young think tankers to sort of demystify the think tank. And, think tanks, in addition to all the challenges that they have to face, they have to contend with adversarial governments in countries that they work with, or adversarial responses to research in general, where governments are always suspicious or are inclined to sort of suppress anything that researchers or think tanks may want to say. So I think, as I said, the burden is on us to sort of stimulate interest in the social sciences, or in whichever sector that we work in, and to stimulate interest in data specifically, which is equally important, especially as we've learned, to tackling COVID-19. So, in the event that this whole demystifying think tanks fails, I think we'll be forced to sort of transcend the way we think about collecting data and being innovative in our methodologies and thinking of ways to go around governments. But that's not an idea that is ideal, because we still need government buy-in to make our work more impactful. So I think we have a lot of work to do, and we have a long way to go. And I'm glad that there's a community of these like-minded people that we've been speaking with today. So thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, as you say, lots of challenges ahead. But after the discussion today, I feel reassured that the future of think tanks are in good hands. So we've reached the end of our time. I want to say thank you so much to everybody for joining us today, to our 5 starting speakers here and everyone else who joined the conversation in the fishbowl, with Mentimeter, and in the chat. Thank you to Southern Voice. There are more events happening today and tomorrow, so please do join those. And if you'd like to share any other perspectives or thoughts on this topic, do so using the hashtag Southern Perspectives. Thank you again. Bye to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.